Hello, everybody. How are we doing today? End of the semester, and I'm still drinking massive amounts of coffee, but that's how I roll. What are we actually doing with this lecture? So this lecture is one that I was wanting to do at some point. It's going to be fairly short. I didn't feel like having you, or I didn't want you to just come to a class at 6:30 in the evening for me to spend maybe a half hour, 45 minutes talking about this. Whether or not people would have maybe participated as well. Sometimes the participation was a little iffy. I thank you for bringing up some questions and expressing some of your opinions throughout the semester. But I wanted to have an opportunity to have, I guess, my own reflection paper about the semester and the things that we talked about, kind of an overview of the semester, but also maybe some additional thoughts that we talked about throughout the semester. And I have a couple little surprises that I was going to do in class, but I didn't. I actually kind of forgot when we were going over some of the Major League Baseball stuff. So, I apologize if there are some noises in the background. I am very close to the road, and sometimes you have some loud vehicles come by. So if you hear some rumbling, that's what it is, and I apologize for that. I try to do the best I can with noise cancellation stuff, but I don't have a noise cancellation room, so that's what we're just gonna have to do. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get into this, and I will try to put up the PowerPoint over. If you're listening, it's going to be off to my right shoulder. It's actually going to be your left. So I'm trying to describe everything so that those who are not seeing it visually, it's like hearing it auditorily, aren't seeing it, then they kind of get an idea of what's going on here. But some of the PowerPoint slides, I kind of mixed them all together. Go over some of the major points again. So the first one here, evaluating ergogenic substances, really talked about the Deshay Act. The Deshay Act was really the milestone point in which supplements were basically on this path of not necessarily being regulated. Now, obviously, people can't put out massive claims like, "Oh, it's going to cure diseases. It's going to make you lose, hundreds of pounds or dozens of pounds within a few weeks, whatnot." Even though sometimes they cross that line, maybe potentially. In some of the claims, they can't necessarily claim that it's going to cure anything or it's going to solve some sort of major problem. And in fact, even if they do say that it's going to help you to lose weight or potentially help you if you have maybe a certain condition, there's always going to be some sort of fine print that says the best results occur with good diet and exercise, or consult a physician, or whatever the case may be. They try to put that claim in there so that they can still get sued, but so that they don't get sued out of business, basically, because they can at least fight that. Like, hey, we said that you can lose weight on it, but here, look at the bottle. This fine print, it says that you have to use good diet and exercise. So it always begs the question, what if you just did good diet and exercise to begin with and not have the supplement? And that's where you get into the research behind some of it, which we'll talk about towards the end of it. And that's really how I want to wrap this up, is about the pseudoscience around a lot of these ergogenic aids, and sometimes the actual science behind them. Some of these things actually do work. So the Deshay Act, it basically labeled everything as food. And so any of the supplements that are there, they don't necessarily have to be regulated. They're regulated as food, so they need to be made in a clean environment. And I'm sure there's some inspectors that might come into some of their plants or whatever. But if it's made outside of the United States, I'm not sure how that plays a role then in terms of the inspections. So that's something you also need to be aware of as well. So some of the marketing claims, especially with the Deshay Act, again, I kind of touched on this. You can't say it cures something, but it might promote or maintain your health, whatever it may be. It might help you, but it can't say it's going to cure something or it's going to be some sort of magic pill or powder. Now, somebody who is a dietitian, a coach, a trainer, they must rely on well-rounded information. And these are the research studies that are actually performed in these supplements. And not just supplements, but also some of the devices. And athletic trainers have to do this all the time. If there's a new piece of equipment that comes out or a new methodology of maybe taping or some sort of device, maybe a knee brace or whatever it is, they need to figure out, well, is it actually better? Well, how do you know that? There should be research on it. There should be independent research. It shouldn't directly come from the company that's making the product. That can happen. The company can make that product, but that shouldn't be the end all be all of all the research on that specific product. There should be somebody else researching this stuff to see if there is efficacy in the product. Does it actually work? And is there safety? And those two things sometimes don't jive together. Sometimes they're safe, but they're not effective. And sometimes they're effective, but they're not safe. So, but anyway, so the research studies is very important there. The research on all these products, extremely important. So the safety issues, there are some things that can give you toxicity, even some of the vitamins. Some of the vitamins have a toxicity level. So if you're getting too much of it, then it could cause some problems. Even something like vitamin K can actually be a little bit toxic if it gets too high, and that could be in some of the vegetables, but also in massive amounts in some supplements. I don't know how much of certain vitamins and mineral supplements that you need to take to actually get some of this toxicity. It's going to vary depending upon the actual supplement itself, but some of the stuff is just bleh. Again, I refer to it as expensive urine. And I'm not the only one that refers to it that way. Not to say that some people don't need it or it's not going to help some people, but is it absolutely necessary for everybody? No. Is it absolutely necessary for athletes? No, not necessarily. If you're getting a good diet, good, well-rounded diet, it doesn't necessarily matter. It may help, it may not. It just kind of depends upon the individual and whether or not the type of diet that they have and the type of training that they have. Do you need some sort of supplement? And that goes along with all of these supplements, even with protein. And protein is probably the one that's most misunderstood. So we'll get into that. So I brought up the question at the very beginning of the semester. What exactly is a level playing field? How do we determine this? All right. So no one is on any type of drugs. No one's on any type of supplements. No one has any advantage over the next person, but everybody has potentially their own advantage with genetics. Maybe better equipment, could be better shoes, better spikes, home field advantage. That's a big advantage right there. That's an obvious advantage that some people just kind of ignore, but they also reference it at times. The Denver Broncos, they have a home field advantage when they play someone who is maybe more of a sea-level team, such as maybe the Dolphins. The Dolphins come to Denver, they could have some problems because of the altitude. Now, not to say that the Dolphins are always going to lose when they go to Denver, but they're potentially going to have a harder time with the exercise and the physical activity that they're performing during the game than the Broncos would, because most of them are probably acclimated or acclimatized to that environment. Same thing if a team such as the Dolphins are playing in Florida and it is super hot, or maybe Arizona could be another one. Of course, they have a dome too, and that could be another advantage. But a team that is generally a cold weather team are now going and playing a hot weather team. Say it is November and it's normally cold in New England or maybe Pennsylvania. And let's say you got the Steelers or the Eagles going to Arizona, or they're going to California or wherever it is warmer, much more warmer. they're going to have a harder time playing. So that's an advantage for that specific team. That was kind of a long rant there about just home field advantage, but those are the things that are not a level playing field. I can't think of a scenario, even if it's a neutral site. I don't know if there's any time where there is a complete level playing field. Just not 100% sure of that. Other things like LASIK surgery, some people can afford it, some people can't. Professional players can usually afford that, but some people that are in high school might not be able to afford that, or the parents might not be able to afford that. But they're able to get it anyway. But some are able to get it anyway. And even the same thing in college. They might even be able to pay for people to help them, a dietitian, possibly a psychologist, or somebody who is helping them maybe with hypnosis in certain ways. And hypnosis can potentially work. There is at least some evidence to show that it could potentially work in some instances. So, and that's dependent upon the individual. But there's a whole list here. And what do we actually consider a level playing field? Well, I don't know, to be honest with you. I think we all have this idea in our mind what a level playing field is, but it's tough to describe it in words until we see something that doesn't go along with what we feel is a level playing field. And that could change throughout different cultures as well. Cultures as well as different leagues around the world. It doesn't have to be just within the United States too. Again, this is a global class, and I try to bring that into it. And we did see a couple documentaries where that was pretty prominent. The differences between the United States and the rest of the world. So some terminology then. Ergogenic is just work producing. Ergolytic was work decreasing. Some of these supplements are actually work decreasing. Supplements or even devices are work decreasing. Placebo, it's just an inactive substance. It has no bearing, no physiological bearing or chemical bearing. Most of the time it's just a sugar pill. It shouldn't have any effect at all. And the placebo effect then is that there are physiological responses to taking or having this specific product when there shouldn't be, right? There is no actual mechanism at which this should have worked, but it did work. But it didn't work how the person thought it worked, on the chemical level, on the physiological level. It was mostly in their head, right? If someone says, "Here, take this pill, you're gonna have more energy and you're gonna lose weight." Well, if it's just a sugar pill, it shouldn't do anything. The amount of sugar in it isn't going to affect their physiological, their physiology really all that much. Shouldn't either affect their metabolism either. Obviously, they're going to break it down for energy, but it's really not that much energy. But if they are in the mindset that I want to lose weight and they are convinced that it's going to happen, they might feel like they have more energy, and therefore they might work out a little bit harder. Or they might work out a little bit longer. They might do different exercises because now they're like, "Oh, wow, I have more energy because of this pill." And then that leads to weight loss. That is the placebo effect. Touched on protein as well. Differences between complete and incomplete protein, basically meat protein and everything else. If it doesn't come from meat, for the most part, I can't think of anything that is not meat and is complete protein. Basically all the amino acids that we need in our diet. Specific amino acids might be the beneficial factor there in terms of which ones you get. The branched chain amino acids tend to be some of the more common ones. A lot of the proteins are either in powders or in bar form. Most of the protein bars, they're just expensive Snickers. I know that some people really, I don't know if they take offense with that, but that's basically what they are. If you look at a Snickers bar and then you look at an actual protein bar, there's little difference between them. And I'm just not talking about Snickers bar. There's other ones too, but something that has chocolate, some sort of maybe caramel or peanut butter, peanuts in it, nougat, whatever it is in that bar. If you look at the ingredients, and then look at the breakdown of the actual things that are in there, the protein, the carbohydrates, the sugar, the fat, the total calories, it's all about the same. In fact, some of the protein bars have way more calories than maybe just your average Snickers that costs a third of the price, a quarter of the price sometimes. Um, I don't see the benefit under most conditions to have to spend two, three, $4 on a candy bar that is claiming to increase protein consumption all that much. The powders, kind of the same way. Maybe there needs to be a little bit of supplementation within the diet, depending upon how much somebody is working out and what their normal diet is anyway, or are they having time to eat throughout the day, especially if they're not able to drink milk, or if they're not able to eat eggs, either personal choice or maybe they have an allergy. Then some supplements may need to come in to the diet a little bit with either powders or bars or something like that. But the average athlete and even some of the elite athletes sometimes need to be a little bit careful about how much they're actually getting, because if they're just getting a whole bunch of more protein, yeah, that's important for building muscle tissue, but also carbohydrates are important as well, and fats are also important in that aspect. Carbohydrates tend to be the most important one, which then goes into low carbohydrate diets. I touched on that maybe a little bit, but not a whole lot. And then obviously some other countries may have some differences in terms of like what they are using to supplement their diet. Some of them may actually have natural foods, either eggs or certain grains, maybe nuts. Peanuts is also another, as long as somebody doesn't have a peanut allergy, peanuts are a good source of protein as well. Also a good source of good fat along with that as well. So anyway, that's a little bit of rant there on protein. On average, let's say the average person, about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body mass is what they need for protein. Maybe up to 1.0 if they're physically active. If there's an athlete who is exercising quite a bit, they're training a lot, they might need maybe 1.5, maybe up to 2. There has not been there has not been any difference seen in the research. I think it was above 2.7 grams per kilogram of body mass. Now, having said this, if somebody's eating 20,000 calories or 25,000 calories a day, then yeah, they're going to be well above that 2.5, but that's just based upon their total caloric intake versus what they need for protein. So you need to get those calories somewhere. You could bump up either fat or carbohydrates, but having something a little more balanced might be a little more beneficial. So that's going to throw it off, but those are outliers. The average person generally, I'm not saying everybody, generally don't really need a whole lot of this stuff. It is again, market, and it is a market making scheme. So, sticking with, protein in the powders. I guess this doesn't necessarily mean, I don't know why I had protein on here for this slide, but you see a nice big gentleman here with a 6-pack, actually almost an 8-pack. But he probably didn't get that way because he was taking this particular supplement. And this is where I went into nitric oxide and alpha ketoglutarate, or arginine alpha ketoglutarate, which is AAKG. And the whole mechanism behind this was that it was supposed to stimulate the nitric oxide within the body, and then that is to vasodilate the blood vessels, therefore increasing the pump throughout the day and increasing the amount of absorption of nutrients throughout the body. Does it actually work? Probably not. There might be a small amount of it happening, but does it actually work the way they propose it? Maybe not. In terms of the absorption of the nutrients and gaining muscle mass that way. Very few studies have seen much difference between the supplement and the placebo in these cases. So there you go with that. Anyway, And then creatine being one of the more popular supplements. And this is one that actually has evidence to work and is fairly safe. There's really not much of a body of literature that has any major side effects. There's maybe a few here and there, and a lot of times it actually has to do with the actual supplement itself. Maybe it has too much sugar in it, or it has something in it that's more, I guess, acidic, and it might cause a little bit of heartburn or gastric reflex disease, or gastrointestinal reflux. Not necessarily the disease, but it causes a little bit of gastric. What I was wanting to say is you have heartburn. I'm just going to take that out. I can't really speak this afternoon. Anyway, so we have the creatine. This is a naturally occurring product within the body. This is nothing that is something that is magical and that we created out of thin air and created in a laboratory. Of course, I guess we could potentially create it in a laboratory, but I'm saying that the creatine is naturally occurring. If you eat meat, you're going to be ingesting some creatine. You have creatine all throughout your body right now. It is an absolutely necessary product for us in our bodies. Does the supplement work? Yeah, maybe. Most studies show that at least there's a little bit of evidence. Some say that there was nothing, and then there was a bunch in the middle. They were like, well, we're not really sure. It wasn't significant enough. For the most part, though, again, it can help. It can help to help with those short bursts of activity. It could even potentially help with long distance runners. There's evidence to show a little bit in that. Helps with power output. Again, those very short bursts, the anaerobic exercise, the very short bursts of activity. When somebody is taking creatine, they are also retaining a little bit more water, and which makes them look bigger. They look in the mirror and then they lift it a little bit harder. So it just kind of depends upon the individual there. Caffeine is a major, well, I won't say major, but it is a majorly ingested supplement. And I call it a supplement, but it's also classified as a drug. It is the most widely used drug in the entire world. So it's just not the United States, but also throughout the rest of the planet. Now, we tend to get it mostly in coffee, but also some other forms are tea, either iced tea or hot tea. We'll get it in chocolate. It's actually quite common in chocolate. And the one thing that is somewhat of a, I won't say a myth, but it's a misconception, is that if a kid is eating some chocolate and they get all hyper and the parent blames it on the sugar, well, it's not the sugar. It's actually the caffeine that's causing them to be all crazy and bouncing off the walls. That's the whole reason. Does it work? Yeah, for the most part. There are some people that don't have much of a response to it. Those are the low responders. Some people, they can take about a half a cup of it and be completely fine. But then there's other people that drink a half a cup and they're shaking and they're all jittery. Is it absolutely necessary in the diet? No. It can help to increase alertness and awareness, especially if somebody is tired. But does it help overall in terms of maybe muscle mass gain or strength gain or weight loss? Maybe a little bit, but really not a whole lot. Some of the recreational drugs, alcohol, cocaine, marijuana, nicotine, these are actually considered ergolytic. They don't necessarily help somebody perform, depending upon the scenario, though. If somebody is on maybe something like cocaine, that is going to obviously increase their activity levels potentially. Nicotine, maybe. Alcohol could potentially increase someone's performance because they could not realize how much pain they're in. They can feel the pain, but they're just not recognizing the pain itself. So in some instances, it could potentially be ergogenic, but generally not. They're generally considered ergolytic. and anabolic steroids. And we have this beautiful picture here of somebody trying to cheat the system. This was the Wizinator, the fake penis, probably a silicone penis. And in the waistband of it, there was a little bag of clean urine. And this product is still available. That's why most of the time you have to drop everything now. You can't have, just your underwear or anything. Like there has to be, butt ass nakedness in the bathroom or wherever it's taking place. So these are mimicking the male sex hormones, and they're just increasing muscle mass. They're also decreasing fat mass. There's also some evidence to show that hand-eye coordination could increase, which is one of the reasons why baseball could benefit from that. So some of the risks of using, you can get down through a lot of these. You can read through them. You can see them all over the internet. There's a lot of them that could potentially happen. Does roid rage actually occur? I don't know. If someone's a jerk on steroids, or off steroids, they're going to be a jerk on steroids, generally speaking. So, I don't know if there's any evidence to show that roid rage is an actual thing. Well, it does occur. It just, that person was probably a jerk off of steroids as well. And then more lists of what's actually occurring here. And this is more in females. And then we get into a little bit more, the actual mechanism of creatine. I kind of had this a little bit out of order. I apologize for that. So you can look through that again. I'm trying to get through this a little bit. Some fat loss stuff. And this is something that is just not within the United States, but also elsewhere in the world, because not just the United States, but many countries throughout the world, their obesity levels have increased. So what do? Well, you can have some regulations in terms of maybe certain fats that are in foods. Like we don't have trans fats now. Those are banned. But if people are going to eat, they're going to eat. If they're going to overeat, they're going to overeat. I don't know if a government regulation is going to actually solve that issue. And if people are going to eat high caloric foods and eat them a lot, then they're going to eat high caloric foods and eat them a lot. I don't know if you can really stop that. So people individually want to lose weight, but sometimes it can be difficult. So what do you do? Well, a lot of times it might be just be human nature, but we want the easy fix. And that is where the fat loss supplements come into play. The first big one here was Hoodia. This was actually sold maybe as a separate supplement, almost like a cactus-like plant, but they're actually not related. But anyway, it was an appetite suppressant, and this was actually put into a supplement known as Trim Spa. And that was where I talked about Anna Nicole Smith. Most people didn't get the reference. And, at least, of course, my references are getting old anyway, because I'm getting old, and that is a problem. I wish we had anti-aging supplements. Maybe I would take them, even if it was a placebo effect. That would be okay. Maybe I get some better references anyway. So on February 7th, 2007, Orlistat, or also known as Ally, that was the very first drug or very first supplement that was approved by the FDA. And this was a fat absorption product, meaning that you had to take some supplements along with it, which were the A, D, E, and K vitamin supplements, because they were not going to be absorbed, at least in high amounts. But also, another thing that was happening, the major side effects, people were having major diarrhea and gas, especially if they were taking, or if they were ingesting high fat foods or any type of fat. It's got to go somewhere. It can't just disappear in the thin air. So, well, I guess the gas could, right? But the diarrhea is not going to disappear in thin air. It's going to disappear down your leg or somewhere else. So that was one of the major side effects for it. But so you need to be on a lower fat diet to begin with. But if you're on a lower fat diet, controlled the diet overall, not being on this, then what was the point of the supplement? So these are the questions to ask. But So some other hormonal agents, again, I kind of bouncing around a little bit here. Anything to deal with testosterone or the derivatives of testosterone, they probably don't have the same magnitude of effect as testosterone themselves or steroids, but they could have potentially some of the same side effects. And went into some of the clips here. I don't know if I'm pretty sure I showed a clip of South Park. There was a Up the Down Steroid episode of South Park where they actually really threw McGuire, Bonds, and Giambi under the bus. And it was kind of strange. Giambi actually died during this semester too. So I don't know if any of that had to deal with steroids. I'm not going to proclaim that it did. And we may never know, but I got dogs barking. Oh, I'm sorry. If you hear it in the background, I apologize. But that was another point that I made throughout the semester, is that just because somebody was on steroids and something bad happened to them, maybe they committed suicide, they had major depression, they developed heart disease, they developed maybe cancer, whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have that condition because of taking steroids. Maybe, but we don't know. So to assume that the steroids are actually doing this, we have no idea. Some people will adamantly say, no, this is the reason why. But people get cancer that are not on steroids. People have depression, and people commit suicide that have never taken steroids. People have developed heart disease who had never taken steroids. So how do we know that it was because of the steroids? You know, that would be a very difficult study to do. There's a lot of nuances there for that. So I'll just leave it at that. The other thing too I talked about is people boo-hoo steroids, and then they also love their old teams, the old nostalgic teams like the Steel Curtain, when most of the people, players in the 70s, I won't say most of the people in the general public, but a lot of athletes in the 70s, especially even in the early 80s, they were on steroids. Football teams, football players, they were on steroids. A lot of them. And you don't want some of these other people in the Hall of Fame, but you love this group of people. That's what's kind of strange to me when I look at the cultural aspect of it, is that we ignore it over here, but then these people, oh no, I can't believe they did that. No, again, just my thoughts. This is just kind of an additional thought. And I think you heard me talk about that before. And I know some people who are big into the Steel Curtain and the Steelers of the 70s, big tough team. Yeah. But never want to see McGuire or Sosa or Bonds ever in the Hall of Fame. Not because because of their numbers, but specifically because they took steroids. That's, yeah. I guess the term there would probably be hypocrite, but I don't know. All right, let's move on from that topic. So the mechanical aids, weighted bats, talked a little bit about that, clothing, compression garments, specialized footwear, and also some different equipment, aerodynamic equipment, especially for speed sports. The weighted bats, I think, is the most interesting one in that there's a certain limit of how heavy the bat can be to actually cause the effect that it's supposed to cause. But also that's a plus or minus. It can be lighter. It doesn't have to be heavier. So you don't necessarily need the actual weights, the donuts on the bat. You can actually have just a lighter bat. So there you go. That's all I'll say about that. Some of the other stuff too. Cupping, man. This is one of those ones where I know that there is a large group of people, of trainers, therapists who really believe in this. And I'm not saying there's nothing there. I'm not saying there's nothing there. However, what I'm saying is the data is not there. And when I ask people who are about cupping, I asked them, like, what's the data? Well, it's kind of iffy. And okay, well, let's figure it out then. The mechanism behind it, I get there, but it oozes almost in a literal sense, because some of these people were actually bleeding because of the cupping. And if they're cupping and needling at the same time, but it oozes pseudoscience. Like it's right on that cusp, pun intended. It's right there. It seems like it's pseudoscience, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not, but it seems like there's also a lot of pseudoscience that goes into it. But there's also a lot of people that are trying to bring it into the modern age and make it safer for one thing, and not trying to do the glass cupping to where they actually put a flame underneath it, and then that burns the air out, and that causes the suction, and that also can cause major burns. That's dangerous, and that's stupid. Let's just kind of be honest with that. But some people do it because they want to gain an advantage. Again, I don't want to poo-poo anyone's parade. But I just, from my perspective, I need more data. I need more hard data to actually show that it works. If anything, if it was just these marks, all right, these black and blue marks or red marks on somebody's skin, if that's all the negativity behind it was, or the side effects were, fine. I'm okay with it. And I brought that up with even compression garments. All right. Even if they don't work, if they're a placebo effect, cool. That's fine. That's totally okay. But do we need to be spending money on something that doesn't work? That's the question that I have. The overall question, but I just need more data on a lot of this stuff. I'm sorry that this dog, it's not my dog. It's not one of my dogs, but it has been barking for almost a half hour, almost the whole time I've been trying to record. It's just bothering me crazily. I can hear it. I don't know if it shows up in the audio, but holy cow. Oh man. I can't wait to live like 15 miles away from the nearest person at some point. I hope I can have that happen in my lifetime. Anyway, this is just kind of random, today. I'm sorry. Anyway. All right. So, then we get into, respiratory stuff and the physiology behind it. I won't go into too much detail because I spent basically a whole class on it, in the altitude training, EPO, and then blood doping. And that all kind of led into the cycling dilemma, or the doping scandal, I guess, if you will. And then a couple of different of the documentaries that we watched there. So we went over pulmonary diffusion of gases and what was actually occurring there on a physiological level, and looked at the pressures, and it's actually the pressure differences in the gases that is causing where the gas is being exchanged, how it's being exchanged at different points, either around, or in the lungs or in the muscles themselves. And that respiratory membrane, again, that's where the gas exchange occurs within the lungs, and the altitude then. So at altitude, it's not that we have less percentage of oxygen in the air. We have the same amount of percentage of oxygen. It's usually right around 21% ish, usually a little bit lower than that on average. But the difference is the air is more spread out. The molecules are spread out a little bit more because there's less pressure. So if you take a balloon at sea level and it is, say, 6 or 8 inches in diameter, it is now much bigger at altitude. So that's the same air molecules inside that balloon. They've just spread out a little bit. They're just further apart from one another. That's the difference. All right. So the given volume of air that we are breathing in less oxygen molecules. Therefore, that translates into less PO2, less partial pressure of oxygen once it gets down into the lungs, and then that starts off a chain of events that causes less partial pressure throughout the rest of the body. So it's much more difficult to perform certain exercises because we don't have as much oxygen available for those aerobic processes. And that's the biggest influence of altitude. And we went into the differences between sea level and at high altitude, that 4,300 meters, that's well above sea level there, Pikes Peak, I believe. Looked at the oxygen consumption versus either the heart rate and the pulmonary ventilation. So breathing rates and heart rate are increased, and this is all to try to counteract the low amount of oxygen. So there's a decrease in actual peak performance that can occur at the aerobic level. At the anaerobic level, it may actually benefit it because depending upon where they're at, maybe less air resistance. So what actually happens? So what then actually happens is we have polysemia. We have an increase in red blood cell production in response to this. And this is due to EPO or erythropoietin in the natural sense to increase the red blood cell production. Can we use the altitude training then as an ergogenic aid? Yeah, possibly. There is some evidence to show that the live high, train low method can potentially work. And live high meaning that you're just basically sleeping at altitude and then you're training at a low altitude. That's pretty much it. And so you're maximizing the benefits of the altitude exposure, but also maximizing the amount of intensity that you can exercise at. So the live high, train low methodology, and had pictures there all throughout of the chamber that I used in grad school. And I'm pretty sure Kent still has this chamber. They've probably updated it since then. I believe they've even added a couple different scrubbers, if I'm not mistaken, to try to get up to the same simulation as what Everest would be. So we're talking the highest of high altitudes, at least on this planet anyway. So the doping that actually occurred within cycling, that was either the transfusions or it was EPO. The transfusions can occur either with their own blood or can occur somebody else's blood. There could be some possible safety issues with that. But the EPO or the E or the PO or the Edgar Allan Poe, that was one thing that I learned. I found that very, very fascinating that they called it Edgar Allan Poe, or at least that's what it was sometimes referred to as. But they did this to increase hemoglobin, to increase the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. They also took testosterone and a couple other things, I'm sure. But they took all of this to maximize their VO2, oxygen carrying capacity, oxygen utilization is really the big thing there, and increasing and maintaining muscle mass throughout. So again, more pictures. We were talking about the mechanical aids. So we watched the documentary Icarus. Fascinating. This was the first time that I'd watched it this semester. I watched a little bit of it before class, but I'm like, I kind of want to start this fresh, but I was hoping some people were there. I even had candy. Nobody showed up. And then I had to eat all the candy then. So they were taking a bunch of other stuff. I'm not really sure where I was at. I had to take a small little break there. Had a battery issue. So the human growth hormone, I talked a little bit about that. The cyclists were not the first people to do it, to take human growth hormone, and they weren't the only athletes, and they still are not the only athletes to take human growth hormone. Human growth hormone is at least from what I know, can't be detected through the urine. Maybe they've developed some tests potentially, but it has to be a blood draw. So depending upon what the tests are, the blood tests or the doping tests, they might not be able to get it. But this was actually synthetically developed in 1985. So people were actually using this. People still use it for certain ailments because it can help to stimulate growth in certain tissues. Some athletes that admitted taking it: Marion Jones, she was a sprinter in the Olympics; Alex Rodriguez, and also Bill Romanowski. Played for a few different NFL teams, and he admitted taking it as well. And I'm sure there's been a plethora of athletes who admitted taking some HGH or other testosterone anabolic steroids. So, but HGH is naturally occurring in the human body. It's human growth hormone, and it is in response to exercise. That's how it's released. It's released actually in proportion to the intensity as well. The more intense the activity, the more human growth hormone is going to be released. So continuing on here with the Icarus discussion, I brought up some questions. So how do you feel about folks starting a doping program? Do you wish he would have performed better? What are your kind of thoughts there on, were you kind of hoping he would lose because he was doping? I'm sure some people were, and that's okay too. Talking about Grigory, and he was almost, I referred to him as almost an honest cheater, in that he didn't want to see the athletes taking dirty anabolics. He's like, okay, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's do it clean. Not clean in the sense that it's not doping, or clean in the sense that it's a level playing field, but clean in the sense that there's nothing extra in the products that's going to hurt the athletes. That was the big thing. And then it talked about the Berlinger bottles and how Russia was able to sabotage that, and they had the hole in the wall to move the bottles back and forth. And it was fascinating. And it also kind of had this feel of Rocky IV and this Russia versus America thing. But also it was a key point that I wanted to make in America versus Russia. In most countries, even in the United States, and if it happened in Canada, Mexico, I would think there's a lot of countries where if something like this would have happened, Grigory or whoever was running it, this doping scandal of athletes, some things would have possibly happened. They would have, one, definitely got fired. They may have gotten fined, may have gotten jail time, may have lost credentials, whatever it might be, or, might be shunned. In Russia, some of those things can also happen, but the other thing that could happen is that Russia, or the Russian government, the KGB or whatever they're called now, they're going to kill them. End of story. And it's not like after so many years they're going to forget about it. I mean, there's been stories of people that have ousted Russia, and years later they get assassinated or killed. So it doesn't matter. So Grigory is going to be in hiding all of his life. That's the difference. That's the difference. They're going to get killed. We are likely not to see that in the United States. I know our government, especially the CIA, has done some really shitty things. And you could look a lot of that stuff up. But I don't know if we're going to kill one of our own because of doping scandal. Not to say that some individual couldn't have a bounty on somebody, but our government, probably not. They're just going to give them a fine. They're going to send them to jail, whatever it might be. But they're not going to kill them. That's the difference. There might even be some other countries that do that as well, but Russia specifically is going to do that. And we've seen from this past semester some things going on with Russia and Ukraine that they don't mess around. They just yeah. So, and they're the heads of that country are just not they're just not good. So, pure and simple. Kind of the last part that I somewhat got into there too was the gene manipulation. And trying to maybe even change the genetic makeup of somebody, either pre-birth or some things afterward as well. And I really wanted to get into the preconception. Could you want a child, and once we get to the point where we can manipulate any gene that we want, and that person, we say, okay, we want them to be a world-class athlete, or at least have the potential to be a world-class athlete. I mean, a lot of this is dependent upon their training, their diet, and other environmental factors that are going on. But setting up the genetic profile so that they have the best potential, then is that now a level playing field? They didn't choose that. They didn't, it was just their parents. But if two world-class athletes get together and have a child, then that child has now genetically predisposed to being a world-class athlete. End of story. That is that is gene manipulation, I guess, in the natural sense. But if we were able to manipulate it in the lab, what's the difference? And is that, would we consider that natural? Would that person be able to be tagged throughout their entire life, either through some sort of birth certificate or something? It could even be at that point, it could be some sort of tag, actual electrical tag underneath their skin or in their brain or whatever it might be, to show that, oh, their genes were manipulated. This wasn't a natural conception, right? There was manipulation of the genetic code. Should it be legal? Should it be legal in any sports? Should they have different leagues if this is possible? I mean, if they're kicked out of every single league because of this, then how are they going to feel? If they were made to be this world-class athlete, and then in their teenage years, it becomes banned. I mean, that's a concept too that I think about, that if something like that happens. So parents decide, this is what we want. We want a world-class athlete. We want them to look like this, or potentially, again, there's a lot of environmental factors there, but we want them to potentially look like this. But then they train up until maybe 13, 14 years of age, maybe 15, and they're looking to go to the big leagues, right? They're looking to go to whatever professional sport that they were made for. And now that league and all of the leagues have outlawed any people that were genetically modified. Now what? They can't go back and change it. It's not like they can go off of the drug. They can't just say, okay, I'm going to come clean of any steroids, right? This is their genetic code. So what do they do then? So those are some things that at some point, we're going to get there. Again, whether it's 50 years or 100 years or 1,000 years, I don't know. But at some point, we're going to get there. And those are the questions that we're going to have to come up with. Just asking questions. Just asking questions. I'm thinking more towards the future. So, and then again, what if we decriminalized everything, all the drugs, all the supplements? Could we have separate leagues, right? And we've seen the same thing with marijuana. Some of the leagues have maybe laxed some of the rules on marijuana use because it is becoming widespread legalized. Same thing with alcohol. I'm sure alcohol was, well, I don't know if Major League Baseball or any of the other major sports would have potentially had rules against alcohol use and prohibition during the Prohibition era. But that's basically what we've had with marijuana and all the other recreational drugs, is we have prohibition. So we start reducing that prohibition and start allowing some of these being legalized. If people are using them commonly, like alcohol, how can you ban it? That's seems kind of strange. And plus, there could be some benefits to it as well. It's just not that, oh, it's a drug. It's meth, and I don't know if there's really any medical benefit to meth. There might be, but if it is, at least I don't know about it yet. But marijuana, there's a body of literature out there with benefits to it. Whether some people like it or not, there's some benefits. The other thing too, although we talked about some people who potentially died from certain uses of steroids or other drugs as well, ephedra being a big one, very few people have died directly. I'm talking directly from taking the actual drug. All right. I'm not talking about what most people probably died of, either that they were taking way too much of it, they were already depressed and then they got on them and then they maybe took their own life, or they were trying to lose weight and they took too much of the product and they were dehydrating themselves and they weren't eating enough food. And they also had underlying conditions. Like, that is something that is a problem, right? And those are individual circumstances. But The vast majority of individuals who took these products have not died directly from them. Same thing with marijuana, and the same thing even with cocaine. You could even make the case for cocaine, because if you look at the numbers of cocaine, they most people are not addicted to it. Most people actually take it more recreationally, almost like some people are more social smokers with cigarettes. They don't get addicted to it. I think only something like 2 or 3% of the population who try cocaine are addicted to it. Most people who take even all the other recreational drugs, I think it's probably close to that. Some might be a little bit higher, some probably a little bit less. Marijuana, probably not addictive in the common sense of being addictive. It's kind of probably more of like just a habit, but it also makes them feel good. Now, what about steroids? It can probably be addictive if they're feeling better about themselves. Ephedra can possibly be addictive as well. But the thing is, how many people actually died directly from the products themselves? Not many. Maybe a few. But the numbers just don't show that. If that were the case, ephedra would have been outlawed well before it was. It would have been outlawed from the start, or close to the start of when it was released to the public. There were dozens of people that I knew that were taking it, and nobody ever had a major side effect, other than I feel a little bit lightheaded because their heart rate was increasing a lot. Okay. But we were also drinking enough water. We at least we didn't think we had any underlying conditions. I didn't know anyone who died, and not to say that it doesn't affect anybody. Not to say that it didn't affect families or anything like that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is directly killing somebody. That's what I'm saying. All right. That didn't happen a lot. All right. It was all individual circumstances. I know probably YouTube's going to flag me for that shit. Oh, well, I'm not monetized anyway. Doesn't matter. At least I'm not monetized yet. So I'm sure someone's going to comment, oh, how dare you? It's like, you don't have any heart. No, I feel for those people. I feel for the families who lost loved ones because they had this product that they were taking and they weren't either taking it correctly or had other issues that were going on, or they weren't taking it properly. Or even if they did die because directly of taking the product. But what I'm saying is, when you look at the totality of the situation, it wasn't nearly as bad as what everyone made it out to be. Again, everyone's going to hate that because like, oh, people died. Yeah. Again, it's sad. I can't stress that enough. But we got to look at the big picture. All right. So to end this, let's get off of that topic. So I probably already pissed some people off. That's all right. Let's go back to some topics that I talked about at the very beginning. I think the very first lecture, and this is about the science behind all of this, right? People just don't believe dumb things. They actively resist further learning rather than let go of those beliefs. And this is by a quote from the book of Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols. Some people just completely ignore facts, data, research. We've seen it a lot with COVID. I fell into that trap too. I'll be honest. I started to fall into that trap, but then I'm like, okay, let's look at some of the data. But some of the scientists also fell into, or at least I won't say some of the scientists, some of the public scientists started to maybe fall into that trap, and some of the politicians also fell into some of that trap as well. And I talked about it in a couple different classes as well. Some of the stupid things that we did during COVID. But we have to sometimes take a step back and look at the actual data and look at the actual numbers on things. Look at what is actually going on through peer-reviewed research, instead of just doubling down and believing what we've always believed. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay. I've changed my mind quite a bit. If you looked at me when I was 18, 19, 20 years old versus now, holy cow. My way of thinking is a little different, actually a lot different. I wouldn't say I've gone a full 180, but maybe 100 degrees, right? I'm off in a different direction than everybody else probably. But it's okay. It's because I started to understand the science behind things instead of just believing something because that's the way that's something I've always believed, or it's something that somebody else believed, or it's something that is commonly believed, right? We always talk about this common sense. Well, sometimes common sense isn't even right. Something we commonly believe isn't actually correct, right? Just like what I was talking about. Oh, if you take cocaine, you're going to get addicted and you're going to die. And well, most people who take cocaine, try cocaine, never get addicted. And a lot of people who take cocaine take it recreationally, just like alcohol or whatever else. Most people who drink alcohol don't get addicted, but there are some that do, and it ruins their lives. It ruins the people's lives around them as well. So anyway, I'm just going to try to stay off of that topic a little more. Also, another quote by Carl Sagan here. When we are self-indulgent and uncritical, when we confuse hopes and facts, we slide into pseudoscience and superstition. I think the key point there is that when we confuse hopes and facts, that's the problem, right? We all hope that something is going to work. We all hope that a pill is going to work. We all hope that this powder is going to improve our strength. We all hope that coffee is going to pick us up in the morning. We all hope that steroid is going to make us a couple $1 million, which it actually might. But sometimes those hopes get in the way of what the facts actually are. A lot of times. And I think, again, it's just human nature. We hope for things. We want them to come true. And we have this willpower that, okay, this is going to work. This is going to work. But sometimes we just need to step back and say, you know what? The data doesn't show it's actually going to work. And the evidence that I have, maybe from personal experience or someone else's experience, it doesn't work. So why waste the money on it? Right. I had a thought, but I'm going to let it go because, again, it was about cupping. I keep going back on cupping, but again, that one tends to be some of the most comical stuff. Again, it might be right. There might be something there, but it's teetering. It's teetering on that pseudoscience. All right. So the science then, so we need reliable base of knowledge when in some of those definitions. And then it had the famous quote there. Well, that picture's a little bit out of, there we go. The famous quote by Abraham Lincoln. The problem with quotes on the internet is that they are often not true. I believe he said that, I think it was the day before he was assassinated too. So it was later in his presidency. It was right after the war. So science must define parameters, seek out relevant information, and propose solutions to rigorous testing. And this could lead to skepticism about what he or she reads or hears. So that's the point, is that be skeptical of what somebody is saying on TV or what an advertisement is saying in a magazine or online somewhere. Be skeptical of it. Question everything. Just because there's a guy standing there in a lab coat doesn't mean he's the actual scientist that performed the study. Just because there's a guy there or a girl who has a six-pack and jacked and ripped doesn't mean they got that way because they were taking the supplement or using that specific product, that exercise equipment. Absolutely not the case. Could be. There's a chance. But most of the time, that's not the reason why they got that body. Right? And we went through some different examples of it. I'm going to go down here. Suzanne Summers with a Thigh Master. We had, I forget what this was. This was another ab machine. Most of the time, these stupid devices are ab machines that probably work the abs, but they're not going to just make you magically have a six pack. Same thing with any of the, most of the ab belts, butterfly abs. So people want to lose weight, right? They want to lose weight. They want to gain muscle mass. They want to perform better, and they want to do anything they'll do anything they can. And they'll believe sometimes anything that they can. So the differences there between science and pseudoscience. And that's why I say that cupping is one of those things that kind of borders on that science, pseudoscience, is that, yeah, there's some peer review stuff on cupping, but it's iffy whether or not it actually works or not. We're not 100% sure. There might be something there, but in terms of the actual mechanism of bringing blood to the surface and causing more healing, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything actually there or not, or if it's just a placebo. And then vaguely defined methods. I mean, we still haven't fleshed out what the actual methodology is, how much actual suction, how much poundage of suction needs to be there. What are some of the failures? And based on belief rather than evidence, there's this long-held belief. This was an ancient Oriental method of healing, right? That's where it came from. Are there some conflicts of interest? Possibly. I don't know if some of the companies that make some of the cups or anything like that, maybe, but it just doesn't seem like it's been scrutinized nearly enough with it. So then the last Carl Sagan quote that I will have you listen to: finding the occasional straw of truth awash in a great ocean of confusion and bamboozle requires vigilance, dedication, and courage. But if we don't practice these habits, these tough habits of thought, we cannot hope to solve the truly serious problems that face us. And we risk becoming a nation of suckers, a world of suckers, up for grabs by the next charlatan who saunters along, who just kind of strolls in, right? And end of quote, who just kind of strolls in and says, yeah, this works. Right. This was kind of more towards the overall science, this quote, the overall science of the world, and talking about maybe politicians or someone who is really influential. But I think it can also be something like this can be put in with supplements and ergogenic aids, because there are plenty of people, athletes included, who will tout a product when it doesn't work. All right. They're getting paid, but they'll make you believe whatever they want just because they have a pretty face, or they have a common face that everybody knows. So just be careful with that. Just be very, very careful. All right. So I said that I would, I said that I would have a surprise. So we got a hat. All right. If you're not seeing this, so this is a actual hat from the year McGuire broke the record. It says McGuire 61 smashing the record. So there is the hat that I got. I don't even know where I got it from. Smells beautiful. I don't know if I want to put it on or not, because I'm sure there's like bugs and stuff in it. But anyway, so there's the hat. And also here is the jersey that my sister actually bought me during that. Actually, maybe the year before. So there's the jersey. So I'll put it on. So there we go. There, I'll be wearing a Cardinals jersey for the remainder of this video. I just want to discuss some of the movies, videos, whatnot we watched. Man, I can't button anything right. So the first one was Long Gone Summer. Looked at McGuire and Sosa and the home run race in '98. So that was why I got this jersey. This is actually really big on me. I used to be a bigger dude. Of course, I'm big now anyway, but man, this feels really, really huge on me. But so I'm not going to wear the hat because the hat stinks. It was in a closet for 20 some years. So anyway, yeah. So McGuire and Sosa. the cultural aspect behind it, again, I was not the only person in Western Pennsylvania. Again, I was a Pirates fan. I still am a Pirates fan. But everybody, when McGuire come up to bat, they were a Cardinals fan. And there were a lot of Cardinals jerseys there who were also cheering for the Pirates when McGuire was not up to bat. It was a strange time to be in the stands. Again, it was strange. It was fascinating, but it was strange. Again, you had this lovable relationship too between McGuire and Sosa. Sosa referred to him as the shoeshine boy from the Dominican Republic, and McGuire being the kind of this California boy, this kind of larger than life character, right? He was like this tree trunk of a person who was just hitting these massive home runs. Watching him in batting practice was awe inspiring. So that was that documentary. Hopefully you got something out of that. Again, the cultural behind it, we as a culture kind of pushed it, right? We loved it. We strived to have someone beat that record. And it was almost like culture was completely ignoring, I wouldn't say the obvious, but at least some of the questions behind what was actually going on. Who knows? Then the next one I believe was Icarus. And I talked a little bit about that then in the PowerPoint previously, but, again, we see this difference between what was happening in the United States, or could happen in the United States versus what could happen in Russia if someone's caught potentially doing this. We also see that how bad Russia lied, right? They do whatever they possibly can to get away with it. They try to put everything on Grigory or put everything on whoever else, but they don't state that they were also part of it. They don't state that the government officials were part of it or the KGB was part of it. They don't state any of that. They just completely lie about it. And then they're going to try to kill that person who was, the person that they're blaming. They even had the one person in there, just coincidentally or strangely die of a heart attack. Yeah, probably didn't happen that way. But anyway, that was Icarus, and the thing too with that, with Icarus from a cultural perspective, from I guess a worldly perspective. Again, it's a global class, so we have to kind of put that in there. Is that the cycling portion of it? All right, is that this was going on all over the place with cycling, and I think it's probably still going on in certain aspects. In Europe, United States. So yeah. And then talking about Russia, we also discussed what was going on in the Olympics this year with the figure skater. Did she actually have a choice of what she was doing? Did she even know that anything was going on? We don't know. And we may never know, with that. So we'll move on from there. Then the last one then was the Lance Armstrong. We just watched the second part. The first part was kind of the build up to what was actually occurring and then the fallout from it. But keep in mind, he was not the first one. He was not the last one. He wasn't the only one that was taking any of this. He was maybe be considered the ringleader. He was certainly the most famous because he won 7 in a row. He won 7 Tour de France's in a row, which is astounding. Again, I mentioned it in class that after his second and third, it was when he was in his fourth or fifth, like we were keeping up with it. Some of my friends, like we would keep up on it, but we wouldn't watch it every day to see where he was like we were the first couple years. Cause like we weren't cyclists or anything like that. But we're like, oh wow, an American's going to win the Tour de France. Fantastic. But after the second or third, we're just like, oh, he's going to win another one. I mean, it was almost automatic that if he was in the race, he was going to win. And whether or not that's good or not too, that brings in more questions about, competition and stuff that are probably not really necessary for this class, but the biggest question I propose with this, yes, he took all this stuff and it was against the rules and he lied about it, but also everybody else was doing it. Well, I won't say everybody else, but most everybody else was doing it. In fact, there's a lot of times where you need to get down to the at least the double digit place or the 20th place to even find somebody who was not doping, or at least not accused of doping. At least we don't know if they were actually doping or not. So he was just the best at what he did. He was the best cyclist and he was the best doper. So what? I know that some people were probably like, well, what do you mean? So what? I mean, so what? In that if everybody's doing one particular thing, it's a level playing field at that point, right? If everybody's doing it, it's a level playing field. So he was just the best at cycling and the best at doping, right? There was the combination there. That's the question I always pose. Again, I'm not saying that we should allow everybody to always dope, but I'm just saying that under these circumstances, he was the best at what he did. And just happened to be what he did was dope. And also cycling too. It wasn't like he was a shitty cycler and then took steroid or he took some testosterone, but also EPO, and then became this world-class cyclist. He was a good cyclist anyway. He was also a good doper. He knew what to do, right? And he was good at his training and leading up to the Tour de France. So the thing that separated him though, and I pointed this out, and he even pointed out in the documentary, is that he went after people. Not only did he lie, that was one thing, but he also went after people and sued them and hurt their reputation because of it. That's what separated him, right? That's what made him look like an asshole. So anyway, that was that. But again, it was happening all over the world in any of the cycling events. It was common, and it's been sprinkled throughout history in different events too. Cross-country skiing, Nordic skiing. It doesn't even mean that Russia and the United States were the only countries ever to dope. There were certainly other countries doping. Germany was also accused of it. Actually were doping. I believe it was East German swimmers. I did link a video to that. We didn't go over that in class, and maybe if I teach this class in the future, I do go over it maybe a little bit more. The East German swimmers, they were basically forced to take steroids. It was just one of those things that they had to do. So anyway, to wrap this semester up, I hope that you had a fun time. My goal here was to, for me to learn a few different things, to provide a different perspective on some of these topics, to get into some of the science behind it, but also some of the cultural aspects from it. And that was kind of the last part of the second half of the semester. Was I didn't want to just spend all this time on the science the whole semester. First off, most people aren't in a science field, so that could be a little bit boring. But also the cultural aspect of it is really what I wanted to go into the idea that it's just not the athletes themselves, it's just not the sports themselves, but it is the culture that drives this. Would McGuire, Sosa, Bonds, Giambi, Canseco, all these people, would they have taken steroids if we weren't pushing to see more home runs? All right, if we didn't cheer each time there was a 500-foot home run hit? Probably, yeah, maybe not. If we didn't pay athletes millions of dollars, would they be doing it? If Russia didn't want to be on top every single Olympics and make sure that try the best they can so that they can maybe have a chance to win every event, would they be forcing people to take steroids, or would they be going through this rigmarole of tampering with the bottles of the samples, maybe not. I mean, some of that's the culture of the people in charge, but also maybe even the culture of some of the people that are in the athletics. Same thing with cycling. That culture that was built within cycling and around the world, that was, it didn't happen overnight, but we wanted to see people, for so many straight days, weeks cycle, and not decrease performance throughout that. And also start breaking records and win it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times in a row. That was exciting to us. And we completely ignored, the general population somewhat ignored some obvious questions. Not to say we should accuse people, but we should at least raise some questions about what's going on, because that's certainly not natural for somebody to be doing that, right? If somebody is bench pressing 1,000 pounds, we need to start asking questions. All right. First off, what are you wearing? Are you wearing a bench shirt? That would be one of the more obvious questions. Was it a legal bench? Do we know it was exactly 1,000 pounds, or did it look like it was 1,000 pounds, but it was like plastic weights? And what was the person taking? If they were taking anything, more than likely they were taking something. Just to be obvious. Again, not accusing, but just asking questions. All right. It's just something that we have to do. If someone hits a 600-foot home run, if someone hits a 500-foot home run consistently, we have to start asking questions. If somebody is breaking world records and they are from Russia, we probably have to ask questions, right? We're not accusing. We just have to ask questions, because we have this evidence in the past that something happened. We know when something isn't right with human performance. So asking questions about it. Again, that's the cultural aspect of it. Again, not to accuse anybody of it. Nobody should be offended, but somebody should be aware that if they are breaking all kinds of records, or they're hitting a bunch of home runs, or if they're hitting long home runs, or if they are, if they're in a sport in which doping was common in the past and it's still lingering around, then they should not be offended that they're getting asked certain questions. I think it's perfectly legitimate for something like that to happen, but maybe not. So there's a whole bunch that I did not get into in this wrap up, but I went into some of the apologies with McGuire, the pseudo apology, I guess from Sosa, but I think there's a large group of people who do feel sorry about what they did, maybe fooling people. And I know that some people might not believe Lance Armstrong, but I think he is. I don't know if he's sorry for doping, but I think he's sorry for being such a jerk to everybody. I think that is the key point there. Of course, there's a little bit of animosity there between him and a couple other people, but anyway, man, I'm going to get out of this for the goodbye. So I will officially take the McGuire jersey off. I think it actually stinks a little bit too. I haven't washed it in a while. But I was going to wear in class that, one of the days we were talking about it, but I'd never brought it in. So there we go. Hope you had a fun semester. I apologize for being somewhat of a disjointed semester. The one day I didn't get the video to work and I wasn't sure how to do that. So technology sometimes eludes me, even though I have all these little gadgets. I thank you for a good semester. I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to ask. Leave a comment down below if you'd like to, but if not, thank you for a good semester. Thank you for those who were participating, coming in class. I really appreciate it. So take care. Have a great summer, and question everything. Later.